When people talk about economic, cultural, and technological influence in the world, they usually refer to powerful nations, but no one even thinks that. There's a phenomenon that works more quietly, more steadily, and yet on a much larger scale. It didn't start with armies clashing, or with taking foreign lands, or with slogans about a great nation. It all happened much more calmly. They simply arrived, quietly appeared in different corners of the world, and just opened shops, stalls, clinics, IT startups. Their children and grandchildren became doctors, bankers, prime ministers, and even presidents. And then suddenly, you start to notice that their holidays are becoming yours, their food, your favorite, and their success, the norm. You had heard of them, but never paid much attention. But they were already everywhere. And they can't be defeated. And just look at the heights they've reached in politics, science, the arts. So who are they? And why do they always survive, and more often than not, thrive? On a busy street in Kuala Lumpur, the capital of Malaysia, the smell of spices blends with the noise of motorbikes. There, between stalls selling samosas, a 60-year-old man named Rajiv makes tea for customers. He was born in Malaysia, as was his father. But at home, he still speaks Tamil and sings mantras, just like his grandfather in southern India. There are millions like Rajiv. And that's just the beginning. As surprising as it may sound, national diasporas play a huge role in the political life of a country and of the world in general. What is a diaspora? The word comes from Greek and means scattering. The ancient Greeks used it to describe their fellow citizens who left their homeland in search of better lands. Simply put, a diaspora is a community of people who left their historical homeland but maintained a connection to it, cultural, linguistic, religious, or familial. They may live in another country for generations and still see themselves as part of their people, continuing to preserve traditions, holidays, language, and even ties to their ancestral land. So, which is the largest diaspora in the world? You might say the Jewish diaspora, since Jews, once deprived of their homeland, spread across the world. The fact of Jewish migration is undeniable, but you'd be mistaken. Two other diasporas are even larger. And one of them is the Indian diaspora. It plays a major role not just in the life of India but also in the UK and even the United States. In the US, the Indian community is about 5 million people. But they've surpassed the Jewish diaspora not just in size, but also in the role they play in society. It's a highly influential segment of the population. You'll find scientists, cultural figures, high-ranking politicians, and business people. As you can guess, this is a fairly well-off demographic group in the US. By the way, let's clear something up. Indians, Hindus, and Native Americans are not the same thing. Hindus are people who practice Hinduism. Yes, they might live in India or in any other country. However, it's worth remembering that India is a multi-ethnic country with followers of various religions: Christianity, Islam, Buddhism. So Hindu refers to religion, Hinduism, and Indian means a person living in the country by the Indus River, that is, India. And Native Americans is the term for the indigenous people of North and South America. That term was given to them by Spanish explorers who mistakenly believed they had landed in India. Okay, now that we've sorted that out, let's move on. How did it happen that Indians had to leave their homeland and wander the world? India is a country with one of the oldest histories on Earth. Life here on the Indian subcontinent began in the Stone Age. And by the 3rd millennium BCE, the Indus Valley Civilization had formed. They farmed wheat and barley. Of course, wars of conquest and power struggles didn't pass this land by. There were great empires here, and raids by nomads. Until the mid-17th century, India was far from the main trade routes and wasn't of much interest to Europeans. But then the famous traveler Vasco da Gama opened up new trade possibilities. It's important to add that the journey from Europe to India and back was long and dangerous, making Indian goods incredibly expensive. Naturally, trade brought India development and prosperity, but it also brought a growing threat that the people of the land of elephants didn't notice right away. Europeans started buying up Indian land for next to nothing, developing their own industries, and by the mid-1800s, India had become a full colony of Great Britain. How did the British change life in India? In just a few decades, England removed almost the entire Indian treasury from the country, along with goods worth £40 million. Many Indian provinces, crushed by unbearable taxes, went bankrupt, leading to poverty and famine. Famine in a country that harvested crops twice a year. Can you even imagine? In Bengal, once a wealthy region of India, where textile production was the main craft, local weavers weren't allowed to take any orders except those from British companies. And they were paid pennies for their work. Naturally, that industry collapsed quickly. Farmers suffered too, land taxes were doubled, and even land reclaimed from the jungle was incredibly hard to farm. The colonizers intentionally created terrible living conditions, believing that the poorer the people, the easier they are to control. The British behaved in India like full-fledged masters. A white man could whip a dark-skinned Indian or throw him a coin and say, "Here, buy yourself some rice." The country that was once a jewel, with its ancient culture, architecture, and mineral riches, was brought to its knees. The British took advantage of the situation. Many Indians began to enlist in the British Army or take jobs outside of India. The British Empire exported them as cheap labor, sending them to sugar plantations in the Caribbean, Mauritius, South Africa, Malaysia, Fiji. But the colonizers weren't satisfied with just that. For further enrichment, they forced Indian farmers to grow poppies, from which they made illegal substances for sale in China. Do I even need to say how profitable that was? And when, in 1830, the Chinese emperor banned the import of such goods, the British declared war on him. Who do you think made up the British Army? Certainly not their white-skinned compatriots. The ones who went to fight were the dark-skinned slaves, Indians. By the way, such an army always took part in the wars led by Great Britain. But despite harsh bans and public executions, Indians stubbornly preserved their last stronghold, religion and faith. The colonial government tried to break their spirit, but couldn't erase their sacred customs. Hindu women sacrificed themselves to preserve their honor. Muslims refused to eat if the food went against their faith, even at the cost of their lives. Indians feared losing their souls more than their bodies. The British used especially cruel and symbolic punishments. Muslims were killed with bullets greased with pig fat and sewn into pigskin. Hindus were beheaded or quartered, depriving them of hope for a dignified afterlife. The native people of India continued to believe and hope for a better future, raising uprisings, which were always crushed by the powerful British Army. And those who left for work in other countries didn't have it any easier. They left as contract workers, which was often just a polite way to describe a new form of slavery. They faced hard conditions, humiliation, and death from disease. But amazingly, after the contract ended, they didn't go back home. Why not? Many had nowhere to return to, relatives had died, land had been sold, homes were destroyed. But more importantly, they had already adapted. Even in harsh conditions, in a new country, they took root. They stayed and became nearly invisible. Meanwhile, in India, the British used a strategy that helped them strengthen their power. They began using those who were willing to cooperate with them and go against their own country. Simply put, traitors who sold their homeland. And those were the Indian elites. They were surrounded with attention, sent to study in Europe, granted honorary titles and high positions in the colonial administration. In fact, the colonizers created a part of society raised with British values and loyal to the great empire. Modern Eastern scholars believe this was the key factor that led to the destruction of traditional Indian values and systems. According to them, by the early 20th century, this led to a deep loss of identity and a deterioration of Indian society, the consequences of which India still feels today. But outside the country, the Indian diaspora not only survived, it began to thrive. And continues to thrive to this day. Why? We need to remember its gigantic size. Today, the Indian diaspora includes over 32 million people. That's more than the population of Australia. And they aren't concentrated in one part of the world. Indians live in the US and Canada, in the Gulf countries, on Caribbean islands, in the UK, Fiji, Singapore, the list is endless. And in Africa, millions of Indians live, some families already in their 8th generation. But this isn't just a network of communities. It's a global group of people connected by culture, traditions, economic interests, and family ties. This structure gives the diaspora flexibility and resilience in any social, economic, or political environment. In each country, they don't just live, they put down roots economically, culturally, intellectually. They don't ask for space, they create it. At first, Indians weren't allowed into the local elites, but they found loopholes in the system, opening shops, founding schools, building temples. Where political power was closed off, they built the economy from below. How did they manage this? The Indian diaspora knows how to start literally from nothing. A spice shop, a food stall, a small hotel, a repair workshop, Indians work without losing dignity and never consider any job low, as long as it leads to growth. But especially strong is their ability to turn these small starts into dynasties. In 10 to 20 years, their children already have law practices, IT companies, or investment funds. Grandchildren in parliament or on corporate boards. And so, Indian families own banks, insurance companies, retail chains, and factories. At the same time, they often act modestly, without flaunting their power. For example, in Kenya, even though Indians make up only about 1% of the population, they control up to 40% of the private sector, from trade to finance. And in Uganda, they were expelled in the 1970s, but 20 years later, they returned and started rebuilding businesses again. Today, they control a significant part of East Africa's economy. And do you know who the president of the World Bank is? Ajay Bunga. Indian by origin, born in Pune. And the former vice president of the US? Kamala Harris, half Indian, daughter of an immigrant from India. As you've probably noticed, the Indian diaspora has adapted perfectly on American soil. And did you know that around 60% of motels in the US are owned by people from one region of India? They started by renting old motels and built an entire industry with multi-billion-dollar turnover. This is the so-called Motel Indian phenomenon. Can you imagine their contribution to the US tax base? Over $250 million a year. Science and technology in the US also owe much of their progress to Indian dynasties. Since 1975, the share of patents registered by people of Indian origin has grown from 2% to an impressive 10%. That means every 10th American innovation or technological solution has Indian roots. Indian scientists are actively involved in academic life. Just last year, they received 11% of all research grants from the U.S. National Institutes of Health and were involved in 13% of scientific publications, acting as authors or co-authors. And this growth isn't a coincidence, it's a steady contribution to the country's intellectual foundation. By the way, Navin Varadarajan, a professor at the University of Houston, is also from India. It was at the Indian Institute of Science where he earned his master's degree in organic chemistry. In 2021, he participated in the development of a nasal spray vaccine against COVID-19. And what about IT corporations with purely Indian roots? In the 1990s, India became a large supplier of digital brains, programmers, UI designers, test developers. They worked en masse for Western companies through outsourcing centers in major Indian cities. That was just the first step. 2 decades later, Indians weren't just coding, they were leading. They became department heads and corporate leaders, creating products, platforms, and ecosystems. Let's name just a few. Satya Nadella of Microsoft, under his leadership, the company pivoted toward cloud computing and artificial intelligence. Sundar Pichai, he was behind the launch of Google Chrome and Android, and now leads the entire tech giant. Shantanu Narayan, he transformed Adobe from a software vendor into a leader in cloud design and digital content. Nikesh Arora, CEO and chairman of a cybersecurity company, former president of SoftBank, and one of the highest paid executives in the world. So what's the conclusion? Indians in IT are no longer just programmers. They are architects, CEOs, researchers, investors, and visionaries. They're not just part of the digital revolution, they are shaping its rules. And each year, their influence only grows. While the rest of the world is just entering the era of artificial intelligence, machine learning, Web3, and quantum computing, Indians are already there. More and more Indian students are winning international Olympiads in computer science and digital technologies. More and more Indian women are entering the IT field alongside men. And Indian IT companies are becoming the new global powers. Have people of Indian descent taken over the digital space? Yes and no. Of course, there are many Indians in the field. But they don't push others away. It's more like they're building a house of information technology and inviting in anyone who wants to work and grow. It's worth noting that in the past, the best Indian minds left the country. But today, we're seeing a reverse movement. Many Indian engineers, after working abroad, return home to build, teach, and invest in local projects. Western companies now promote their developments in India, trusting Indians not just with the technical implementation, but with product management itself. Here's an interesting fact. Indians make up about 20% of the entire technical workforce in Silicon Valley, even though they account for only about 1.5% of the US population. Why are Indians so well suited for the digital world? We'll come back to that question a bit later. But for now, let's look at a paradox. The farther from India, the stronger Indian culture becomes. Imagine you find yourself in Mauritius, a small island nation in the southwest Indian Ocean, near Madagascar. Between it and India lies the ocean, and it takes about 7 hours to fly there from Delhi. But one autumn day, Mauritius seems to hold its breath in anticipation of something special. A warm breeze carries the scent of jasmine and coconut oil. You hear the rustle of preparations and children's laughter. The first light, a neon glow like a butterfly, flickers at a doorway. Then a second, a third. Soon, the whole street glimmers in a shimmering dance, like stars have fallen from the sky and scattered across the earth. There are living flames everywhere, in homes, store windows, on the streets, and of course in temples. Locals wear festive clothes, decorate their homes with oil lamps and candles. Intricate patterns made from colored powder appear on the ground at the entrance to homes. It's the festival of lights, Diwali. Translated from Sanskrit, a cluster of lights. It symbolizes the victory of light over darkness, good over evil, and it lasts 5 days. As you walk down the street, people offer you sweets without even asking your name. You become part of this festive atmosphere, watching nighttime fireworks in the sky. And on the ground, small lamps burn. Living. Warm. Sincere. Even without knowing the mantras or the rituals, you feel that you belong here. Maybe that's the power of Diwali. Maybe it's the power of Indian culture itself. In Mauritius, Indians make up over 65% of the population. But holidays like Diwali and Holi have become official national celebrations. Most residents have never even been to India. By the way, the Prime Minister of the island speaks English and Hindi. Presidents and prime ministers, teachers and doctors, judges and lawyers, they're people of Indian descent. And no one calls them immigrants anymore, they are now the ones shaping the island's culture and politics. And this isn't the only example. In Trinidad and Tobago, in Guyana, in Suriname, in Uganda, Tanzania, and Kenya, there are many people of Indian origin. In Fiji, Indians have been living for 5 or 6 generations already, but they still study the Shastras from childhood and cook using great-great-grandmother's recipes. In the Caribbean, Indians have preserved rituals that have disappeared in India itself. And in Suriname, they still sing ancient wedding songs in a dialect that is no longer remembered even in India. How do Indians manage to maintain a spiritual connection with their native land across distance and time? Imagine a person who arrives in a foreign country not knowing the language, without capital, often with no support. And in 10 to 15 years, he owns a chain of stores, his children study at Harvard, and neighbors invite him to run in local elections. You'll say it's a fairy tale or the plot of a movie about someone who got incredibly lucky in life. And of course, you'd be wrong. This is a typical story from the life of the Indian diaspora. Indians are among the most successful migrants in human history. Their secret is that they don't just adapt to a new place. They turn it into fertile ground for growth. And they do it in any country, on any continent, in any political system. These are not just scattered immigrants across the planet. They are a network, living by their own laws of trust. An Indian student who flies to Canada will find a temple, a community, a mentor, a part-time job, not from ads, but by recommendation. That's how, quietly, an invisible empire appears. Without a president. Without an army. Without borders. We've already said that India is a multinational country. But if you think Indians only believe in Hinduism or Sikhism, you're missing a very important element. The main focus is belief in education. Just like among Jews, education is almost sacred. It's not just a tool. It's a mission and a symbol of success. Even in poor families, they'll save money for a child's education, hire tutors to get him into college, and then further. And this is passed from generation to generation. And in the US, Indians are not just the largest, but also the most educated ethnic group. Around 70% hold a bachelor's degree or higher. For comparison, among all Americans, about 35%. What does this give to representatives of the Indian people? Prosperity and power. They lead the world's biggest companies, develop technologies, perform surgeries in top hospitals, and teach in universities. This is not a coincidence. It's a survival strategy that has become a cultural code. I think now it's becoming clear what helped Indians fit so organically into the digital era. The foundation is, of course, mathematics. Indian education, especially in technical schools and colleges, puts huge emphasis on math, logic, and analytics. The second factor is English from childhood. Let's recall, English is one of the official languages in India. This gives Indians a massive advantage in the global IT world. The role of family and expectations of success also matter a lot. Being a programmer or an engineer is not just a job, it's a social ideal in Indian culture. Let's not forget flexibility and adaptability either. Living between cultures is normal for Indians. They fit easily into international teams and know how to think globally. So it turns out that when the world became digital, Indians already had everything needed. Math in their blood, English in their baggage, and perseverance in their character. Indians didn't adapt to the digital world, it's like they were ready for it in advance. They learn fast and work hard, they can adapt in any society, they are goal-oriented and capable of working for the future. And that's another strength of the Indian diaspora. There's another small detail, like a tiny but very important screw in a big machine, that helps Indians win over people in many countries. A simple question, what is something no human can survive without? There are many possible answers, but the main one, of course, is water and food. And who doesn't love tasty, hearty, and healthy food? You guessed it, we're going to talk about Indian cuisine and how it is quietly, spicily, and irreversibly taking over the world. It used to seem too spicy, too aromatic, too exotic. Today, it's comfort food for millions. Curry is served in restaurants in Paris, chapati, Indian flatbread, is baked in California, and the word masala is heard even in American TV shows. How did Indian food go from home kitchens and street stalls into the hearts and stomachs of the whole world? First of all, Indian food is not just one cuisine. It's a continent of flavors. In South India, coconut and spicy sambar dal will charm you. In the north, creamy sauces and tandoori. In Gujarat, Swedish sabzis and vegetarian snacks. In Punjab, hearty naan, butter, and meat. And in Bengal, fish, mustard, and rice. It's a culinary civilization where taste is not just food, but a philosophy. The balance of spices, the energy of the product, the healing qualities of each ingredient. The world has also fallen in love with this food. Why? Because these are aromas you never forget. Jeera, cardamom, coriander, turmeric, chili, ginger, cloves, curry leaves. These aren't just spices, they're a symphony. Indian cuisine knows how to make flavor three-dimensional, enveloping, awakening, and addictive. We should also add that India has an ancient science of health, Ayurveda. It forms the basis of many traditional dishes. What you eat is important, but also when, with whom, and in what state of mind. That is, food is also medicine and ritual. Did you know that golden milk, turmeric latte, now served in Los Angeles coffee shops, is an Ayurvedic drink known for centuries in Indian villages? By the way, Indian chefs haven't forgotten about vegetarians either. A huge number of dishes are completely vegetarian, yet rich in protein and flavor. The world is gradually shifting to a plant-based diet, and Indian cuisine does this naturally and appetizingly, without replacing taste with artificial substitutes. Perfect for everyone. Right now, quietly, step by step, Indian food is gradually spreading across the entire globe. First, of course, in England. Once, the British took Indians to the colonies, and they brought curry with them. Today, pieces of chicken and spicy sauce are the national dish of Britain. It should be added that there are more Indian restaurants in London than in Delhi. Then, Indian cuisine began to conquer the United States. At first, Indian dishes were exotic items in university cafeterias. Then came food trucks and restaurants. And today, Indian cuisine is in supermarkets, premium cafes, and delivery services. Michelin stars were awarded to American chefs Vikas Khanna and Manik Chauhan, who added Indian flavors to traditional American cuisine. I think it's obvious which diaspora they're from. By the way, do you know the brand Suki's Sings? It's a company that offers Indian dishes, including curry sauces, samosas, sandwiches, and other snacks. At first, the products of this brand were sold only in grocery stores and at farmers markets, but now it's easy to find them in American natural food supermarket chains. It's a family business of Indian immigrants. Yes, again, the Indian diaspora. By the way, in 2024, the Sings company launched a line of chicken products without antibiotics, hormones, or preservatives. Healthy and wholesome food. Interesting fact. Indians use up to 25 spices in a single dish. Some are not for flavor, but for digestion. In India, there are almost no pre-made sauces, everything is cooked fresh, and even the spices are often ground by hand right before cooking. By the way, in southern India, food is served on banana leaves, it's aromatic and eco-friendly. However, the US and the UK are not the only countries where people love Indian dishes. In Dubai and Abu Dhabi, Indian cuisine is part of everyday life. From street cafes to luxurious restaurants, Indian chefs rule the kitchens. In Singapore and Malaysia, Indian food has gently woven itself into the local culture. In Jamaica, where an Indian diaspora lives, dishes like Indian curry goat are considered national classics. So, it turns out that Indian food is loved by many. Because it has soul, in India, cooking is an act of love, care, and respect. Because it surprises, you eat stewed vegetables and suddenly taste sweetness. You try a sauce for meat and feel heat, sourness, and the freshness of mint all at once. Because it unites, at one table, you find dozens of flavors, generations, and cultures. But most importantly, Indian food is a language of culture, passed down through recipes and aromas. While some peoples are losing their traditional dishes in the flow of fast food, Indian cuisine shares them, passes them on, adapts, mixes. And that's what keeps it alive. That's how it conquers the world, not aggressively, but aromatically. Not loudly, but deeply. Just like the entire Indian diaspora. Now it becomes clear that it's impossible to break or uproot it. So what makes the Indian diaspora unique and invincible? It's the paradoxical ability to be both here and there at the same time. These people often didn't know if they'd ever return home. But even if they didn't return, they didn't let their homeland and home disappear from memory and culture, passing them on to their descendants. They built temples on islands, taught children mantras in Hindi, preserved even the dialects that have died out in India itself. They adapted, but didn't dissolve. They don't oppose the society they live in. They become part of it, while still staying themselves. Their children learn English, Dutch, French. But on Saturdays, they go to the temple, wear saris, and eat sweets that their great-grandmother once made in a remote Indian village. Turns out, they have no ambition to dominate, they just survive better than anyone. Their weapon is intellect, their strategy, patience, their currency, family ties. They didn't occupy, they took root. Didn't assimilate, they wove themselves in. Didn't forget, they preserved. That's the essence of the Indian diaspora. It doesn't demand a place, it creates one around itself. And it does this so naturally that, over time, those around begin to consider this culture their own. You can close the borders, but they're already there. Almost without being noticed, they've become part of your country. And you didn't even realize when you started eating curry on Fridays and calling your daughter for Diwali.